For all you younger fans who think the Raiders winning 2 Super Bowls in the 1980s was some kind of accident, oh boy, are you missing the full picture. Because sitting behind center for both of those championships was a quarterback with one of the most unbelievable stories this sport has ever produced. A man who was called a bust, released by 2 different NFL teams, sat on the bench for 2 entire years without throwing a single meaningful pass, and then at 32 years old, with everyone in the football world having completely given up on him, came back to win a Super Bowl MVP and make history in the process, and then did it all over again 3 years later. So how good was Jim Plunkett actually? And why does he still not have a bust in Canton, Ohio? Let us start from the very beginning, because you cannot truly understand this man without knowing exactly where he came from. Jim Plunkett was born on the 5th of December 1947 in San Jose, California. And from the very first days of his life, the odds were stacked against him in ways most of us will never fully understand. Both of his parents, William and Carmen Plunkett, were blind. His father was a news vendor running a small newsstand in San Jose just to keep food on the table, his eyesight fading more and more with every passing year. His mother Carmen had lost her sight entirely at around 20 years old, taken by scarlet fever. The family received state financial aid just to survive, living in low-cost housing in East San Jose without a car, relying on public buses to get anywhere. There was no safety net, there was no backup plan. There was just a family doing whatever it took to get through. Each week, as Jim grew older, he stepped up and became his parents' eyes in the world. He helped them cross the street. He helped them navigate their daily lives. And he worked odd jobs from an early age just to help the family stay afloat. Cleaning up at a gas station, bagging groceries at the local store, and laboring in the orchards during summer months to bring in extra money. This was not some privileged kid cruising toward NFL stardom on a silver platter. This was a boy carrying his entire family on his shoulders before he was even old enough to drive a car. But Plunkett himself would later reflect on what that upbringing actually gave him. He once said, "It is no secret that both my parents were blind when I grew up, and I always believed I had to resolve a lot of problems by myself. It is not that I did not feel loved by them. It is just that they could do only so much to help." Think about that for a second. A kid growing up as the one steady hand in a household where the adults could not see. That level of responsibility either breaks you completely or it builds you into something truly unshakable. For Jim Plunkett, it built him into something the NFL had never quite seen before. At James Lick High School in East San Jose, Plunkett became a force across every single sport he touched. Football, basketball, baseball, track, and wrestling, where he won a California high school state wrestling championship at 194 pounds. The kid simply did not know what losing felt like. And at just 14 years old, he entered a local throwing contest and launched a football over 60 yards to win it outright. Nobody in that crowd forgot it. By his senior year, Plunkett had led James Lick to an undefeated football season, and the recruiting letters started pouring in from programs all over the country. But here is what separates Jim Plunkett from nearly every other blue-chip recruit in history. When it came time to choose a college, he chose Stanford specifically so he could stay close to his blind parents. He could have gone anywhere he wanted. He chose the people who needed him the most. That is who this man was from the very beginning. And Stanford nearly lost him before he even stepped foot on the field. A month before he enrolled, doctors found a lump at the base of his neck that was initially feared to be cancerous. The surgery to remove it could have ended his football career before it ever started. Stanford's assistant coach Rod Rust told him the scholarship would be honored regardless of the outcome. The tumor, thankfully, turned out to be benign. But even after recovering from the surgery, Plunkett struggled badly through his freshman year and wound up 4th on the depth chart. Head coach John Ralston actually began considering moving him to defensive end permanently. Plunkett flat out refused. Instead of accepting that demotion, he threw somewhere between 500 and 1,000 passes every single day to get his arm sharp again. Every single day. That is not an exaggeration. That is obsession. That is a man who had been knocking obstacles down his entire life and had no intention of stopping now. By his sophomore season in 1968, Plunkett had seized the starting job and immediately began rewriting the Stanford record book, throwing for 2,156 yards and 14 touchdowns in his very first year as a starter, a brand new Pac-8 conference record. In 1969, he shattered his own record with 2,673 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, and 2,786 yards of total offense. Again, all conference records. Washington State head coach Jim Sweeney had watched enough football to know greatness when he saw it. He publicly called Plunkett the best college football player he had ever seen, and you need to remember the context. This was the same era as Archie Manning, Joe Theismann, and Dan Pastorini. Best he had ever seen. After his junior year, Plunkett was already eligible for the NFL draft and could have collected a massive signing bonus for a family that desperately needed every dollar. He turned it down. He had been tutoring Chicano youth in the community and felt that leaving school early would send the wrong message to the kids who were looking up to him, so he stayed another year. His senior season in 1970 became the stuff of absolute legend. Plunkett led Stanford to their first Rose Bowl appearance in 19 years, throwing for 2,715 yards and 21 combined touchdowns during the regular season, and breaking his own conference passing record once more. The Rose Bowl opponent was the undefeated and number 1 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, one of the most feared teams in the history of college football. Stanford was not supposed to be competitive. Plunkett completed 20 of 30 passes for 265 yards in the game itself and sealed a stunning 27-17 upset that shocked the entire country. When the Heisman Trophy votes were tallied, it was not even a contest. Plunkett beat out Notre Dame's Joe Theismann and Archie Manning of Ole Miss by a wide margin to become the first Latino in history to win the award. He also captured the Maxwell Award, the Walter Camp Award, and every major college player of the year honor available. UCLA head coach Tommy Prothro said publicly that Plunkett was the best quarterback prospect he had ever seen. And in the 1971 NFL Draft, the New England Patriots selected him first overall, making him the first player of Hispanic heritage ever drafted with the number 1 pick in NFL history. Plunkett wasted no time justifying that selection. His first career NFL game was a 20-6 victory over the Oakland Raiders. He finished his rookie year throwing for 2,158 yards and 19 touchdowns, winning NFL Rookie of the Year honors and giving the Patriots their best season in years. In 1973, he finished second in the entire NFL in passing yards. In 1974, he led New England to a 6-1 start and their first winning record in 8 seasons. On paper, it looked like the Heisman winner was delivering exactly what was promised, but the reality behind those stats was brutal. The Patriots' offensive line was one of the worst in the league, and between 1,972 and 1,974 alone, Plunkett was sacked 97 times and threw 64 interceptions against just 40 touchdowns. Those numbers look terrible at first glance, but when you understand he was running for his life on nearly every single snap, it changes the conversation entirely. Then, in 1975, a left shoulder injury cost him the starting job, and New England brought in rookie Steve Grogan, going run heavy and moving on from Plunkett completely. In 1976, they shipped him off to the San Francisco 49ers. He arrived in San Francisco genuinely believing this was the fresh start he needed. Years later, he described it plainly, saying, "I really thought I was going to be the savior, but all I did was put more pressure on myself." The 49ers started 6-1 in 1976 before collapsing to finish 8-6. Then went 5-9 the following year, and then they released him. No team in the league claimed him off waivers. The Heisman winner, the number 1 overall pick, the Rookie of the Year, was sitting at home without a team and without any obvious future in football. He would later describe that moment with complete honesty, saying, "Being cut by the 49ers was the lowest point in my career. I was thinking of maybe getting out of football, go and do something else. Maybe the critics were right. They said, I got burnt out. I got beat up. I could not play anymore. But I am a very stubborn guy." Stubborn. That single word tells you everything you need to know about Jim Plunkett. Because most people in that situation would have walked away and nobody would have blamed them. Instead, Plunkett accepted a call from Raiders owner Al Davis and signed on as a backup quarterback in 1978. He did not throw a single pass the entire season. Not one. In 1979, he threw just 15 passes all year before the 1980 season. He had finally had enough waiting and formally requested a trade. Al Davis said no, and that one refusal ended up being one of the most consequential decisions in Raiders franchise history. Because 5 weeks into the 1980 season, starter Dan Pastorini fractured his leg against the Kansas City Chiefs, and Jim Plunkett walked onto the field at 32 years old. It was not a clean entrance. Plunkett admitted this himself, saying, "It was an exciting time for me. I started the season as the backup to Dan Pastorini. He broke his leg and I took over, and I was quite nervous. When I took over in the game, he got hurt versus Kansas City. I did not perform very well. That is putting it gently." He threw 5 interceptions in a 31-17 loss, and it looked like a complete disaster. But Coach Tom Flores and the Raiders organization looked at the alternative in young Mark Wilson and made the call to stick with their veteran backup. In his very first start, Plunkett completed 11 of 14 passes with a touchdown and 0 interceptions in a 38-24 win over San Diego. And from that moment forward, something absolutely remarkable unfolded. Plunkett went 9-2 as the Raiders starter the rest of the way. Oakland finished 11-5 and barely squeezed into the playoffs as a wild-card team, and what happened next had never once been done in NFL history. Oakland beat the Houston Oilers 27-7. They beat the Cleveland Browns 14-12 in one of the tightest postseason games of that year. Then they knocked off the San Diego Chargers 34-27 in the AFC Championship to punch their ticket to the Super Bowl. And on the 25th of January 1981, Jim Plunkett stood in the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans for Super Bowl 15 against the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that had allowed the fewest points in the entire NFL that season. Linebacker Rod Martin intercepted Ron Jaworski on the very first Eagles drive of the game and set Oakland up at the 3-0-yard line. Plunkett hit Cliff Branch for a 2-yard touchdown to make it 7-0. Then with 9 seconds remaining in the first quarter, scrambling around in his own backfield to avoid a sack, Plunkett lofted a pass to running back Kenny King near the line of scrimmage. King caught it and outran the entire Eagles defense for an 8-0-yard touchdown, the longest scoring play in Super Bowl history at that time. Oakland led 14-0 before Philadelphia could even catch their breath. Plunkett finished that game 13 of 21 for 261 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Oakland won 27-10. Jim Plunkett was named Super Bowl MVP. The Raiders became the first wild-card team in NFL history to win a Super Bowl. And Plunkett became the first person of color to quarterback a team to a Super Bowl victory, and the only Latino ever named Super Bowl MVP. He described the feeling this way. He said, "It was ecstasy, to tell you the truth." Finally getting into the playoffs and winning 3 games to get in that Super Bowl as a wild card, I was just in heaven during that time. Here I am struggling. I was out of football for a few days before the Raiders picked me up, and now all of a sudden I am in the playoffs trying to win a Super Bowl. Al Davis captured the whole thing perfectly, saying publicly, he has to be one of the great comeback stories of our time. But Plunkett was nowhere near finished. After the Raiders relocated to Los Angeles, he was benched to start the 1983 season in favor of the younger Mark Wilson. Once again, Jim Plunkett was on the sideline watching, and once again, the starter went down. Wilson broke his shoulder mid-season. Plunkett stepped in at 36 years old and had arguably the best stretch of regular season football in his entire career, throwing for 2,935 yards with 20 touchdowns, leading the Raiders to 6 wins in their last 7 games. His teammate Raymond Chester, the great Raiders tight end, described Plunkett better than anyone when he said, "Jim Plunkett had the biggest heart, the most courage of anybody I ever played with. He had a great throwing arm, but looked bad, even ugly out there sometimes. But he was so tough, and he could make plays, big plays. he had the will to win. The 1,983 Raiders steamrolled through the playoffs, beating the Pittsburgh Steelers 38-10 and the Seattle Seahawks 30-14 before arriving at Super Bowl 18th in Tampa against the Washington Redskins, a team led by none other than Joe Theismann, the same Joe Theismann that Plunkett had beaten out for the Heisman Trophy 13 years earlier. The Redskins were favored. Plunkett completed 16 of 25 passes for 172 yards and a touchdown as Los Angeles won 38-9. The largest margin of victory in Super Bowl history up to that point. 2 Super Bowls. Same franchise. 2 completely different cities. It had never been done before in NFL history and has never been done since. Plunkett has always credited Al Davis for giving him a second life in the NFL. He said, "I owe Mr. Davis a lot. He signed me, and although I had other offers, I did not want to leave California again. He provided me that opportunity, and then my job was to take advantage of it, and fortunately, I did." And when asked in recent years about the Pro Football Hall of Fame leaving him out, Plunkett answered with the same quiet toughness that defined his entire playing career. He said, "It would be nice, but I do not lose any sleep over it. I did what I did. Maybe the first 10 years were a struggle, but it turned out very well for me with the Raiders." Jim Plunkett retired during the 1988 preseason after a rotator cuff injury wiped out his entire 1,987 season. He finished with 25,882 passing yards, 164 touchdowns, and an 8-2 playoff record. He is the only NFL quarterback ever to win 2 Super Bowls with the same franchise in 2 different cities. He holds the Raiders' record for the longest completion in team history, a 99-yard pass against the Washington Redskins on the 2nd of October 1983, tied for the longest in NFL history. He is the only Latino ever named Super Bowl MVP. And to this day, he remains the only eligible quarterback with 2 Super Bowl victories as a starter not inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. California state senators have written formal nomination letters. The California State Senate passed a resolution honoring him 37-0, calling for his induction. Stanford University has filed official nominations, and still the doors in Canton stay closed. Critics point to his career record of 72-72, his 0 Pro Bowl selections, and 198 career interceptions. But 117 of those interceptions came in New England and San Francisco, behind terrible offensive lines on losing teams with no support around him. With the Raiders, he went 38-19. In the playoffs, he was 8-2. When Jim Plunkett had the right team around him, he was one of the most clutch quarterbacks who ever played the position. So where does he rank? The greatest comeback story in quarterback history. A man born into poverty in East San Jose to 2 blind parents who could barely keep the lights on, who guided those parents through the world as a child, who worked in orchards as a teenager to help the family get by, who overcame a tumor before he threw a single college pass, who was written off by everyone at 30 years old and came back to win a Super Bowl MVP, and then did it all over again at 36. Jim Plunkett was that good. And until Canton finally corrects this injustice, the football world still owes this man an overdue and very serious debt of recognition.